The Greeks. Oh, the Greeks. Just because the origin of their knowledge can be traced to the Africans does not mean that their contribution was non-existent. A civilization so venerated for their miracle, a sudden explosion in knowledge and science that begat modernism. In one of the surviving manuscripts in the great ancient library of Timbuktu, there is a stark admission of the origin of Greek and Arabic philosophical origins, an admission that is not present in other cultures. It tells us that Greek philosophy was borrowed wholesale from Kushtic Kemetic thinkers. In other words, that the origin of the oh-so-celebrated Greek, and thus Western philosophy, is in fact African, and it starts with the basis of knowledge itself. The concept of consciousness that really comes to us from the principle of knowing that you exist, and thus knowing that what makes you the person that you are. That philos of know thyself isn't Greek. It is far older, as old as the temple walls of Nubia and Kemet, as old as the idea of the awareness of the being in this life and its persistence through and its journey towards the afterlife. An idea so powerful that the Greeks copied it in its entirety.
In terms of the whole concept of consciousness, awareness, what the ancients referred to as knowledge of self, the concept of man know thyself is the fundamental principle of the psychology of Kemet. Dr. George G.M. James observed that the doctrine of self-knowledge, for centuries attributed to Socrates, is now definitely known to have originated from Egyptian temples, on the outside of which the words, man, know thyself, were written.
Almost all Greek great thinkers learned their sciences from African priests in Kemet, and because all of them only produced their thesis after having spent considerable time in Egypt. But just like the themes in Genesis, man was created with the ability to control his animal self, and the failure of controlling his or her passion will lead to an animal state, a banishment from the garden of high consciousness, and it is only through control of the self that the man becomes a man, that he differentiates himself from the animal and may even aspire to obtain the status of a deity. Does this not remind you of the teaching of the Messiah? But these teachings existed with the African thinkers for millennia, before they showed up in Greek texts, and even longer, before they were marketed as original concepts born of the minds of whom we attribute them to today.
That somehow the passions run wild in the psyche, in the consciousness, if they are not tamed. And by passions running wild, it leaves no room for the higher powers to enter. But when they are quieted, subdued, and submitted, then the room is quiet for the higher powers to come in. And then the second step, the neophyte was required to search within himself for the new powers which had taken possession of him. Man, know thyself.
This is the story of ideas smuggled across seas and centuries, ideas that shaped the very pillars of Western thought, yet their roots were pruned from the history books, and today we put them back into the soil they sprang from. And when you see the pattern, you'll wonder how we ever missed it. And it all started when the first Greek travelers reached the banks of the Nile and heard priests speak of the sun as the visible face of the good. Long before the Parthenon crowned the Acropolis, scholars gathered beneath the colonnades of Memphis and Thebes. They counted the turning of the stars, measured the annual rise of the Nile, and debated the nature of the soul over papyrus scrolls now brittle with age. Quote from Herodotus, Histories, Book 2, 141. The Egyptians are the first to have said that the soul of man is immortal, and that when the body perishes, it enters into another living being at the instant of each birth. Did you catch that? A 5th century BCE Greek traveler openly admitted that Egyptian priests carried doctrines that would later echo in Pythagoras, in Plato, and in every Gnostic sect that whispered about reincarnation and the Hellenistic night. Yet for centuries we have been told that philosophy began in Ionia, that Thales woke one morning, noticed static electricity, and, voila, reason was born. Oddly, they conveniently omit this little fact, that Thales spent 22 years in Egypt, Kemet, before he produced his body of work. And this pattern isn't exclusive to Thales, Democritus, Solon, Pythagoras. In fact, it is harder to find Greek philosophers that didn't study with the Nubio-Kemet priests for years and decades before they could write knowledge. And Thales was a student that wanted to extract the knowledge that the African had. A philos that taught Plato and Aristotle that, in fact, in order to know the universe, man needed to extract knowledge from within himself. Because the Egyptians believed that all knowledge was already inside of the person, and only through a process of self-discovery and self-mastery could one learn the secrets of the universe. And you will notice here too that this is the exact philosophy learned by Eastern tradition that morphed into the exercise of meditation. The process of quieting the passions, the process of quieting the mind in order to discover wisdom eternal.
Development of the human soul through life and death. I'm sure that Dr. Hilliard will talk about this later on today, but the whole word of education, educere, which means to educe or to pull out, was based upon the idea that all that the man needed to know was already inside anyway. And education simply provided an environment to educe the higher potential that was already built in. So you don't put nothing on nobody unless you train them. But if you educate them, you simply take out what's already there.
Modern Egyptologist Henri Frankfort summed it bluntly. Quote from Frankfort, The Intellectual Adventure of Ancient Man, 1946. Greek thinking did not rise in a vacuum. It was stimulated by the mathematics, astronomy, and theology of Egypt and Mesopotamia. What does this tell us? That the so-called Greek miracle was, not in part but in majority, an African inheritance. And if that premise feels uncomfortable, then you should question those who have introduced false knowledge into your head. And why is it that the presence of these concepts deep within the continent of Africa, south of the Sahara, are not revealed today?
What was to be known in this pursuit of consciousness? The initiate was instructed that he must know self, and self in the conception of the ancients, as well as modern Africans, meant soul. The kind of consciousness which had to be developed was therefore of much greater depth than the brain consciousness that we focus on today. Such consciousness, according to Schwaller de Lubis, is described as no more than a mental projection of what a man believes himself to want and do. The soul in its various dimensions is conceived by the ancients as the most explicit description of the Egyptian conceptualization of human psychology.
To trace the line of transmission, we must remember geography. The Mediterranean was less a dividing sea than a blue avenue of exchange. Egypt's delta sat at its hub. Alexandrian docks bustled with Phoenician cedar, Nubian gold, and Aegean grain. Ships carried more than cargo. They ferried stories, symbols, and philosophical germs ready to bloom in foreign soil. Take the figure of Orpheus, the musician whose lyre charmed beasts. In late antique papyri, his myths appear side by side with hymns to Osiris. Coincidence or cultural osmosis? Initiates of this channel will recognize that in the early period, before 1500 BC, the whole eastern Mediterranean was a colony of the Africans, a colony of Kemet. The early Phoenicians, as we have seen, are indistinguishable from the ancient Ethiopian stock. When Greek colonists settled Naucratis in the 7th century BCE, they built temples not only to their own gods but also to the Egyptian goddess Neith, patroness of wisdom. That is an early sign of intellectual bilingualism, a space where metaphysics could translate, and translation is never neutral. Ideas mutate across language, adopting new shades while shedding others. The Greek term philosophia means love of wisdom, but in Egyptian, the concept of wisdom, Maʿat, embraced cosmic order, moral balance, and truthful speech. To love Maat was to align oneself with the rhythms of creation itself. Now fast forward 2 centuries. Young Plato, disillusioned by the trial of Socrates, sails to Egypt. So later biographers claim. Whether or not the voyage occurred as described, consider the tradition's insistence that true wisdom required Nile baptism. Even if apocryphal, the tale reveals what later Greeks believed about their philosophical pedigree, that the master needed African masters. We stand, therefore, at a crossroads of evidence and erasure. Archaeology unearths Egyptian papyri and mathematics that predate Euclid by a millennium. Museums house carved stelae describing moral precepts akin to the Delphic maxims. Remember, none of this diminishes Greek ingenuity. Rather, it restores the full chain of custody. When a relay runner receives the baton, we celebrate both the sprinter and the team that passed it on. So too with philosophy. To acknowledge African roots is to see the race in its entirety, from Nile floodplains to Athenian gymnasia. And as we proceed, keep one guiding principle in mind. The sun rises in the east, but its rays belong to everyone who feels their warmth. But origins are never a single point. They form nebulae of influence. Enter Kush, Nubia's powerful southern neighbor, whose king once ruled Egypt as pharaohs of the 25th dynasty. Archaeologists at Napata have uncovered temple inscriptions praising Amun-Ra with epithets almost identical to those later used by Greek hymnographers for Zeus. Quote from the Stela of Pa, circa 730 BCE. A moon whose brilliance outshines a million suns. If Nubian monarchs equated divinity with solar radiance, and if they controlled Egypt just before the rise of classical Greece, might their theological lexicon have filtered northward? Consider too the Phoenician intermediaries, master sailors who docked in both Egyptian and Greek ports. Phoenician trader Sanchuniathon, as preserved by Philo of Byblos, claimed the gods were once mortal sages from Egypt. Quote from Eusebius, Praeparatio Evangelica at point 10. Sanchuniathon testifies that Thoth, whom the Egyptians call Tautos, invented hieroglyphic letters and passed them to the Greeks. Such cross-claims reveal an ancient intellectual marketplace buzzing with barter. The evidence refuses to keep still. Even the earliest Greek word for paper, biblos, derives from the Lebanese port that exported papyrus. Every time you open a Bible, you pronounce a Phoenician town, and indirectly, the Egyptian plant that produced writing sheets. Connections, so many that to speak of isolated origins seems naive at best. Our next stop is the port city of Alexandria during the 3rd century BCE, founded by Alexander but shaped by Ptolemaic rulers of Macedonian stock. Alexandria was where papyrus met parchment, where hieroglyph met its offspring once more, Greek alphabet. Quote from the letter of Aristeas, 3rd century BCE. Demetrius of Phalerum was asked to collect the books of the world for the royal library so that nothing useful for the pursuit of wisdom might be missing. Notice how utility, wisdom, and textual hoarding converge. Ptolemaic kings did not assemble scrolls merely for decoration. They understood that to control knowledge was to control power. Among the scrolls shipped in crates of cedar were translations of Egyptian medical treatises, astronomical tables, and cosmological hymns. Greek scribes copied, annotated, occasionally misunderstood, yet ultimately integrated this material into their own philosophical debates. Take Eudoxus of Cnidus, Plato's pupil. Ancient commentator Strabo tells us Eudoxus spent 16 months with Egyptian priests at Heliopolis, learning their philosophy concerning the stars. Quote from Strabo, Geographica, 17.1.29. These priests are the philosophers of the Egyptians. With them, Eudoxus and Plato conversed. End quote. Was Eudoxus merely sightseeing, or was he absorbing an intellectual heritage spanning millennia? His homocentric spheres bear striking resemblance to Egyptian conceptions of concentric heavens governed by Ra's daily voyage, And yet, mainstream textbooks still treat Alexandria as a Hellenistic, almost exclusively Greek enterprise. But the city's priestly colleges remained overwhelmingly Egyptian. Greek philosophers walked their marble colonnades while Egyptian scribes maintained temple libraries older than Homer. Consider mathematics. The Rin Papyrus, circa 1650 BCE, solves problems of geometry with rulers and unit fractions. Euclid's Elements, compiled 8 centuries later in Alexandria, formalizes these insights into axiomatic proofs. But Euclid's origin story rarely acknowledges older papyri on the same soil where he taught. Why the omission? Could it be that colonial logics persisted well before modern colonialism, namely, the assumption that civilization flows only northward? Modern historian Cheikh Anta Diop confronted this bias head-on. Quote from Diop, Civilization or Barbarism, 1981. Egyptian thought, transplanted into Greece, took on the rigor of the Greek language but retained its African essence. That translation amplified, not erased, origin. The Nile fed the Aegean intellectually as surely as its water sustained Lower Egypt physically. Let us hold that revelation and move to the central metaphor of our tale, the cave, a metaphor that has become the pillar of Greek philosophy itself. We would be remiss if we didn't point out the older, more esoteric tradition from Nubia and Kemet that showed that the allegory of the cave was already present in multiple motifs.
The other aspect of the ka, and by the way, many of these things are symbolically represented in the book of Genesis when they talk about Adam being made out of clay and of the breath of life being breathed into Adam. They're talking about the ka and the coming of the ba, because the ba is the breath of the soul that enters into and activates the being of the person. So rather than talking about it symbolically as the breath of God breathing into Adam, they talked about the bird with a man's head that came from the celestial and entered into the ka of the person and together became a living being who became a ka and a ba combined.
The Alexandrian mathematician Hypatia, daughter of Theon, taught Plotinus and the future bishop Synesius. Her father edited Euclid, but Hypatia improved on Apollonius's conic sections and advised civic leaders using astrolabes whose prototypes were already sketched on Egyptian temple walls. Quote from Synesius, letter 15, circa 410 CE. Without Hypatia, I should be nothing. She is my true teacher of philosophy and of the mysteries of the stars. Unfortunately, just like her writings and her life, everything in Alexandria was burned. One of the biggest loss of humanity's knowledge and consciousness. Scrolls were burned, yet ideas smoldered on in oral lore, in monastic scriptoria, in ship captains' logbooks. Picture the Alexandrian Serapeum, a hybrid temple library dedicated to Serapis, himself a hybrid god. Pilgrims lit incense. Philosophers lectured in the forecourt, and scribes cataloged shipments of scrolls using Greek letters for Egyptian numbers. But even the notion of a force that exists throughout the universe that is pure energy and gives life, or gives breath to all living beings, is a philos that also existed with the African well before it appeared anywhere else on earth. And the Egyptians had both a scientific and a spiritual manifestation of this knowledge.
The soul of breath represented the transmission of the invisible energy source like electricity, which runs through all visible functions. The ancients believed that there was only one power, which was symbolically represented as the breath, and that this power or breath was transmitted from the ancestors to the descendants all the way back to the Creator. They believe that this power of energy has always existed and will always exist. The Ba was, in effect, the vital principle which represented the essence of all things.
I would like to pause here to put an emphasis on the extreme depth of the scientific and philosophical knowledge that the Africans had 4,000 years ago. It is astonishing that these concepts were devised at such an early period. If the initiate process, initiate knowledge and practices of meditation led to this, then we would do well to find out as much as we can from the ancients. It may yield considerable benefits for the individual and for society at large. Even the rules which dictate the social contract in Egypt, the 42 laws of Maʿat, those rules were copied to form the basis of the 10 Commandments. The Egyptian concept of Maʿat and the Greek ideal of a just city both express ancient aspirations towards social harmony and moral order. Maʿat, personified as a goddess and invoked as a principle, embodies truth, balance, and cosmic law. In contrast, the Greek just city, most famously elaborated in Plato's Republic, is a philosophically constructed polis in which justice is defined by the proper ordering of social classes and individual souls. While both traditions seek to align human conduct with a higher order, Maʿat grounds that order in a living cosmos overseen by divine will. The Greek schema situates justice primarily within the realm of human reason and civic organization. In ancient Egypt, Maʿat functioned as the animating principle of both the universe and society. It was the pharaoh's sacred duty to uphold Maʿat, literally that which is right, so that the Nile would flood regularly, crops would grow, and chaos, Isfet, would be kept at bay. Rituals, legal judgments, and even the afterlife judgment in the Hall of Two Truths all turn on fidelity to Maʿat. Thus, justice in Egypt was inseparable from cosmic balance. Legal decisions were as much about maintaining the world's equilibrium as they were about resolving interpersonal disputes. Maʿat's all-encompassing reach meant that personal virtue, social ethics, and statecraft were seamlessly woven into a single tapestry of cosmic order. In the Nubio-Kemetic tradition, that balance was tested at the end of one's life through the test of the weighing of the heart. If a person had conducted themselves according to the principles of Maʿat, then their heart would be lighter than a feather, and then would be allowed to enter the afterlife. Again, if this sounds familiar, it is because it mirrors exactly the Judeo-Christian tradition of Judgment Day. And yet, the African myth predates it by many millennia. This is what Dr. Naim Akbar calls the IQ test of ancient Egypt.
His heart is put on the scale of justice, and one's intelligence is measured by whether or not your heart has been so lightened that it will not tilt a feather. That's the IQ test. It means that you have used your intelligence to cultivate your humanity, your ethical being, your moral being, your commitment to service. You've used your intelligence to transform a corrupt society and make it a meaningful society. You've used your intelligence not to destroy the world, but to grow the world. You've used your intelligence not to feed the passions, but to elevate and transcend the passions. And therefore, it has been decredited. It has been removed from its weightiness. It has been moved from its earthliness. It's been moved from all that gives weight to it, and it has transcended. And you can put it on the scale next to a feather, and it won't tilt the scale. What an IQ test that would be. Can't you see Ronald Reagan taking an IQ test? He would be a substandard, profoundly retarded idiot, and all the rest of those who claim intelligence. Look at Harvard. Look at Yale, look at Princeton, look at Oxford. All the scholars of this society would not even make it to the chamber of Osiris, much less their hearts to the scale.
And if you are wondering how to attain that wisdom, how to attain that true intelligence, look no further than the 42 laws of Maʿat. I will cite them for you at the end of this essay. Even more telling is that the concept of social order of Maʿat is the parent template of the philos that was called the social contract by French philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau in 1762. That very idea that man must lose a little bit of his liberty in order to gain a better life through the well-ordered society. Paperologist Jean-Claude Goyon observes, quote from Goyon, from Thoth to Hermes, Journal of Near Eastern Studies 58, 1999. The fusion of Thoth with Hermes represents the most significant intellectual hybrid of antiquity, providing a vehicle through which Egyptian cosmology entered the Greek philosophical canon. End quote. What does this tell us? That philosophy did not stay put on marble lecture steps. It seeped into magical handbooks, sailors' tales, and Coptic monasteries. Ideas, like seeds, find unexpected soil. Consider the medieval period. While Europe grappled with plague, North African libraries in Timbuktu copied Greek treatises side by side with Malian legal codes. Manuscript CRC.14 at the Ahmed Baba Institute contains Arabic commentaries on Aristotle's metaphysics that cite Egyptian sages as authorities. Why is this not headline news in every world history curriculum? Perhaps because such truths reorder global hierarchies of genius. We see, therefore, a constellation of parchment points guiding us toward the same conclusion. African custodianship sustained Greek philosophy across dark centuries, ensuring the Renaissance would have texts to rediscover. What of the Renaissance, then? Was its spark and its philosophical idea enabled by the Africans? Recent digital imaging projects, such as Oxford's Oxyrhynchus Papyri Initiative, have revealed marginal notes in Greek philosophical fragments referencing Egyptian calendar systems. One scrap copies a lost work of Aristarchus on heliocentrism, but the scribe adds in Coptic, as taught by the priests of Heliopolis. That parenthetical alone rewrites astronomy's lineage. Then there is the Vienna Papyrus G2315, a Hermetic text listing 36 deacons, deities governing 10-degree slices of the zodiac. Egyptian decanal star clocks painted on coffin lids millennia earlier guide the same cosmology. Did the Greeks borrow the system wholesale or adapt an existing numeric frame? Either way, African night skies shine over Greek theoretical physics. And in the same way, African esoteric knowledge is also the basis of secret societies. But this too has been misinterpreted.
Walking around with limited understanding of broader things. Got the symbols, but don't know the basis of the symbols. If you did, you would not be Masons. You would be the owners. And as long as you are not an owner, you have not come into the growth that's supposed to be a part of your system. A system which gives you access to powers that not only you have, but we all have. And if you've got what it takes, come on and teach us. Not go off and science it up and mystify it and give people passwords and symbols and backhand shakes and scratches and all this stuff. Come on and teach the people. Come teach the people. Teach the people. That's your responsibility. Teach the people. We don't want individual power. We want collective power. We don't want Washington Monument. We want to know what it means. We don't want an obelisk standing up symbolically over our graves. We want the obelisk to protrude out of our temples into the top of our head.
Just like the light shines from the cave and casts shadows onto the wall, which are only a reflection of the living being's true form, so too is the concept of shadows misunderstood by the Greeks from its original African meaning. A shadow, akin to what we can call ghost. Another notion introduced by the African and bastardized or modified by the Western tradition, because just like with Aristotle and Plato, where every object has an eternal and idealized form, the living being has a Kaaba, which is his eternal essence.
The Kaaba, I was going to say no relationship to the Kaaba at Mecca, but I'm not sure about that. I suspect that there may be some connection. But the Kaaba, K-H-A-B-A, is the shade or covering soul, corresponding to the popular notion of the ghost. It is the astral or etheric body. It is related to the Akashic records, which hold the records of all the pictures or imaginings in our universe. It is the Kaaba which produces emotion and motion. It was further thought that to be responsible for sustaining the sensory perceptions, the phenomena of color, harmony, or rhythm, if you will, and the circulation of blood. So the drums and the rituals in many West African societies were done as means of stimulating the Kaaba. Because in stimulating the Kaaba, one was re-immersed into the Akashic records. So the Haitians, for an example, when they began to have people to hook into spiritual recordings. They begin to play the rhythms, which begin to give a harmonious experience, which then send them into quote unquote a trance, which actually permits the Kaaba to express itself, and therefore the person is able to speak from the ancient records of the Akashic, which are a part of all of our beings.
Before I read you the 42 laws of Maʿat, if you haven't hit the like button or saved this video in your history favorites yet, now would be a good time. I am also eternally grateful to those who support this channel through their sharing of our videos or by becoming a member here or on Patreon at the tune of a cup of coffee per month. You are the true initiates.
It's Big B, the prolific producer.
I honor virtue. I benefit with gratitude. I am peaceful. I respect the property of others. I affirm that all life is sacred. I give offerings that are genuine. I live in truth. I regard all altars with respect. I speak with sincerity. I consume only my fair share. I offer words of good intent. I relate in peace. I honor animals with reverence. I can be trusted. I care for the earth. I keep my own counsel. I speak positively of others. I remain in balance with my emotions. I am trustful in my relationships. I hold purity in high esteem. I spread joy. I do the best I can. I communicate with compassion. I listen to opposing opinions. I create harmony. I invoke laughter. I am open to love in various forms. I am forgiving. I am kind. I act respectfully of others. I am accepting. I follow my inner guidance. I converse with awareness. I do good. I give blessings. I keep the waters pure. I speak with good intent. I praise the goddess and the god. I am humble. I achieve with integrity. I advance through my own abilities. I embrace the all. Don't miss our episode where we cover the richest and most influential family in history. A must-see. Join us and see how those who are said to be without history birthed civilization itself.